Hello, I'm Eric with ECHOTec, and I'm going to show you how to service our high pressure pump on our RO system. And we're going to go ahead and start by removing the valve caps. There's 6 of them. There's the intake on the bottom and the discharge on the top. It requires a 3/8 Allen wrench, and you'll probably need a little help to break them loose. And we're going to remove all the caps and the valves. There's an O-ring under the cap. Then you have the valve assembly. I use a little dentist style pick. Comes in real handy. Again, all the valves are identical, and you should notice that the valve will unseat. There's a little spring. It should unseat with very little pressure. You see it move there. If there's any damage to the valve at all, it needs to be replaced as an assembly. Under the valve is an O-ring that acts as a seal, and that's it. Those are the 3 components to each valve. So we're going to go ahead and remove all those. Okay, now that we have those all out, we're going to remove the manifold. The manifold's held on by 8 bolts. Requires a 5mm Allen wrench. So let's go ahead and take all the bolts out. Okay, now we're going to grab the manifold and just give it a quick sharp tug, and it should come right off. In the manifold are these seals, and these are your ceramic plungers. So we're going to go ahead and remove all the seals from the manifold. Okay, now we have the high pressure seals. And these white parts are a seal retainer. There's an O-ring on the outside of the seal retainer, and so they don't want to pull out real easy. I found that if you push them out through the other side, gently push. You might have to push a little bit on one side and then the other, and they should come right out. So you remove the seal retainers. You see the O-ring there. Under the seal retainer is a low pressure. It's a 2-part quad ring. It's a low pressure seal. So we're going to go ahead and take out the other 2 seal retainers. Okay, so finish removing the seal retainer and the quad ring. Now at this point you need to make sure the manifold is completely stripped, which it is. You need to make sure it's very clean. I use a decalcification solution. For example, I use Scrub Free. They make a bunch of different things out there, but I soak the entire manifold. Make sure that it's nice and clean. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and remove our ceramic plungers. To remove the ceramic plungers requires a 1/2-inch socket. We're removing the plungers because there's an O-ring and a backup ring on the piston rod that holds the ceramic plunger. Now this little O-ring and backup ring is just as important as the high pressure seal. So when we service this, we change all the O-rings and seals. And ceramics, the plungers are extremely smooth, and so you might need a little help with the gripping on them. So I use a paper towel or anything, but they're pretty slick. Okay, we inspect the plunger itself for any kind of chips, cracks, or any kind of damage. And under there is a slinger washer, so it's made out of copper. So make sure that on your plungers you have a flat washer on top, the plunger, and then the copper washer underneath. Sometimes they'll stick to the plunger, so make sure that you pull that off and get it back on there before you assemble the plunger. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the O-rings and the backup washers. So again, I use my little dentist style tool to get under that O-ring, and then I go ahead and walk it around the landing to get it off. And there's the O-ring, and then there's a white Teflon backup washer, and it is split. It's split so that you can take it off and on very easily because it doesn't stretch. And again, we're inspecting the piston rods for any kind of damage. If there's corrosion on the case assembly, again, you want to make sure that's all clean. Now, for demonstration purposes, these are all brand new seals. And so now we're going to show you how to go back together with it. Now that you've cleaned and inspected everything, again, making sure that you got all the debris off. We use a silicone grease, and all your O-rings are going to need to be lightly greased. It's very important that you do this because the initial startup of your machine, it's important that there's no dry contact between the plungers and the seals. So we're going to go ahead and coat all our O-rings. And we put our backup washers on. And we're going to put our O-rings on. Now the O-rings are pretty tight, so when you put them on initially, the threads are going to want to grab them. And here again, this tool comes in really handy. When you use this tool, you got to be very careful that you get completely under the O-ring so that as not to damage it. At this point, I usually put a little extra grease on the piston rods. And we're going to go ahead and reinstall our ceramic plungers. And as you go on, you want to twist it slightly. It helps quite a bit. And at this point, I'm having a little problem with the backup washer on there, so you need to make sure that that's pushed together real good. You shouldn't have to force anything, so if it's not going on there, you need to check and find out what's going on. Okay, we got our plungers on there. Then we have our flat washers. And again, that through editing, the copper washers are underneath the plungers. We got the flat washers, and then we're going to need to put some Loctite on there. We use a 243. It's an anaerobic removable Loctite. And it's very important that you do this stuff. Just a drop. And put the nuts back on. We're going to run the nuts down snug. And then we're going to torque them. And the torque setting on that is 7.3 foot-pounds. I'm going to torque all three of them, 7.3 pounds. Okay, that's it for the plungers. Now we're going to go ahead and reinstall the new seals in our manifold. Now the quad rings that go in the low pressure side, there's a landing and it makes it extremely difficult to put them in by hand. So when you get the rebuild kit, it comes with this tool. And what it is, it's a little sleeve. You slide it in there and then you put your quad rings in. Now there's a quad ring inside of a quad ring. And you want to lubricate that. So there's actually two O-rings there. I didn't pull them apart for you and I should have. Okay. You stick it in the collar and then there's a little plunger. And you just push it right home. It makes it very simple. And again, it's sitting inside of a landing here, which is hard to see. But without this tool, it's a lot more difficult to put them in there. You can do it, but the tool comes with it. And again, you just sit it in there. And using the plunger, it squares it up and seats it very easily. Just like that. So we get our low pressure seals in. Okay, now we're going to go with our seal retainer. The seal retainer has an O-ring, and you can see that there's a base on one side and open on the other, so there's only one way it can go. And you simply put it in the manifold and just gently press it home. Now we're ready for the high pressure seal. In the high pressure seal, you're going to notice some ridges on the bottom, and those ridges go down. Put that in the seal retainer. And then the next piece covers the seal. Now this sits pretty flush, and so you want to put a good amount of silicone grease on here to hold it in place. There's a very, very shallow landing for it, and so if you don't put a good amount of grease on there, she's going to want to fall out when you go to assemble it. Now with a liberal amount of grease on the plungers, we'll be ready to put the manifold on. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and, again, the intake's on always down. We're going to go ahead and line it up and give it one good push, and she should seat right in there. Okay, we're going to go ahead and replace the bolts. Now, with this manifold or any other kind of machine, there's a torque sequence. And what the torque sequence does is it makes sure that you get a uniform tightening of the manifold. Anytime you have a machine surface, it's important that you tighten from the inside outward. And so the torque sequence usually goes in some form of a spiral. And so our torque sequence is such: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And again, that creates a spiral, so that what you're doing is you're tightening it from the, instead of squishing it in and creating an arc, you're going from the inside out. And these bolts need to be torqued to 8 foot-pounds. So each one of these, again, in the torque sequence, 8 foot-pounds. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and reinstall our new O-rings on our valves. Again, silicone grease always on any O-rings. And it's important to use the silicone grease. If you use any some other types of grease, they will degrade the O-ring as well is if it's a petroleum product, it could possibly hurt your membrane. So we're going to put our O-rings that are our valve seats in. And these valves are very hardy. They very seldom have a problem. So you can decalcificate these as well and make sure they're nice and clean. Now when you push them in, that O-ring will hold them nice and centered. And then we're going to go ahead and reinstall the caps. Again, new O-rings on the caps. And as well as the threads. And make sure they're nice and clean, but we like to put a little grease on the O-ring as well as the thread. This helps for easy servicing later. Okay, we'll put our caps on, run them down. And again, our caps are going to need to be torqued. They are also torqued to 8 foot-pounds. And that's pretty much it. It's a very easily serviced item. And it doesn't need to be done very often, but that's how you do it. And again, you need to torque that to 8 foot-pounds.